And welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator. Be sure to like and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation that is not just enlightening, but deeply personal. Morgane Michael, a key inspiration behind the Elemental Educator, joins us to share her incredible journey and the lessons she's learned along the way. From navigating the challenges of language barriers to the profound impact of a mentor, Morgane's story is a testament to the power of connection and resilience. Stay tuned for insights that will not only inspire, but also provide practical wisdom for your educational journey. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator, and now your host, Tyler Comeau.
All right, alchemists, salut, bonjour. Welcome back to another episode of the Elemental Educator. I am here with Morgane. Morgane came to my school division, talked to us, sent a message from her book that she'll talk about in this episode that hopefully you go out and purchase. I reached out to Morgane immediately after she finished speaking and said, here's my vision, here's what I want to do. And she instantly poured her earth to me and said, you need to know why you're doing it, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to bridge the two. Hence, Elemental Educator formed. Morgane is the reason this is here. I can't thank her enough for being here. Morgane, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tyler. This is such a pleasure and a full circle moment for sure. You did it all yourself, though.
I did a little bit of the lifting, but you steered me in the right direction. You showed me how to navigate the waters of change, which we're going to unpack and take that risk together. And I'm really looking forward to doing this episode with you.
Love it.
Yeah. So thanks for joining me. I'm absolutely thrilled. This is just like a surreal moment right now that I get to take in and sit and unpack this with you. And I had the luxury of, when you came to our division, hearing a bit of your story, but I want to hear the bigger version of the whole thing. To where did you start to where are you now?
Wow.
I know.
Yeah. There's so many different ways, and I'll try and keep it snappy. Okay, so I grew up on Gabriola Island, and this came up in our keynote chat. And I think it's basically where the premise and the background desire to write my second book, A Blueprint for Belonging, came from. I was born in France, and I moved to Gabriola Island, this tiny little rural island off of the west coast of British Columbia in Canada. And I was about 5 years old, and I didn't speak a word of English. And so the feeling of being outside of is very familiar to me. And I remember making excuses for the way that I might not pick up on some of the nuanced jokes, or like the inside sort of cultural references, or just the basic playground interactions that were very specific to my little rural community. So it took me some time, and I guess I became an observer. And I would say I'm still that way. As much as I like to not perform, but I like to be on stage and talk to people, it really comes from a place of I just love people and I'm interested in them. But I really think that I was drawn to people because I love to observe. So that experience had a huge impact on me. And I guess in a way I felt like a misfit after that point. I have many friends who I still consider friends, and we're close now from that time. And at the same time, there was a real period during elementary, primary school where I just felt like I was a little different, or there was something wrong with me. And I think a lot of people feel that way. When you talk to kids, many kids feel like they don't quite fit in, or they're not quite the same as other people. There's a lot of comparison. And as we know, comparison is the thief of joy. And so I think that I struggled with that a little bit. And we know that's a current thread through most students these days. And then you fast forward to middle school, or what was for me high school, so 8th grade. I walked into Mr. Graham's annex in his drama classroom, and my whole world totally changed. And I should add, when I was on Gabriola Island, I had parents who loved me in the best way that they could, but it was certainly not the best. I certainly was not. I had experiences with trauma, and so when I see certain red flags with students, that definitely informs the way that I interact with those students and their families and all sorts of things. So I bring that with me as well as I enter this drama classroom. And Mr. Graham was someone who completely shifted my life. He became a real life mentor for me. He was British. He spoke in metaphors. He had these outrageous outfits. So he'd order these custom made like hats, vests. They were brocade. They reminded you of a bad couch from the 70s or something. They were not exactly something that we thought was very fashionable, but he definitely had this reputation that preceded him. He was very unorthodox. And when we walked in, he said, we're going to do some really interesting things together. And I guess I was about 12 years old. One of the first things he asked us to do as a class is to learn The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Okay, fine, we could do that. Not familiar with poetry at this time. I'm like, well, that's an interesting metaphor. Two roads diverge. So we learned that. And at the same time, he said, and there's another piece. And we all sat there going, what next? And he said, you're going to learn to juggle too. And you're going to perform the two simultaneously in front of your 8th grade peers. And we all looked at each other, is this a joke? And at the end of the day, he said, you can walk out of here, and in your head, you can decide two things. And this was definitely a metaphor for life. He said, you can decide to give it everything you have, or you can decide to take the 0. And that was often what he'd say to us. Take the 0 if you want to. Don't put any effort in and you'll be safe. But if you try and you fail, you can try having known that you at least took the risk and you gave it a good shot. And he would always say to us, and if you fail gloriously. So there have been so many times in my journey as an educator, as an entrepreneur, as someone who writes, I've failed so many times. And that little voice is always in my head going, fail gloriously. So there came a point where we did, in fact, perform this in front of each other. Most of us did quite well, despite our worst fears. And we did, in fact, make it. We learned to juggle. I can still juggle with my kindergartners if I need to. And we recited this poem. And I think it taught us a big lesson about failure. You just have to try. And if you care enough, you're going to coast on through and it's going to be okay. And you'll learn something, right? In 11th grade, by this point, I had my driver's license. I remember walking into Mr. Graham's class because I was still doing drama class with him. I just absolutely adored him, and most of the kids did too. And I was having a particularly difficult week, and he had this way of just totally reading us, making us feel like we were just seen and heard and really knew who we were. And I remember him stopping me at the door of the annex, and he had probably just been smoking some Benson and Hedges cigarettes. And I walk in, and he stops me, and he goes, Morgane, I don't think you're ready to come in. And I was a quiet student. I got straight A's. I was a hard worker. So I was like, what did I do wrong? And he just said, I think you need a minute. In the same way that as educators, we give our students a minute when we need to help them to collect themselves, self-regulate, all these things. So he asked me to hold out my hand, and I did. And he put the keys to his car in my hand and said, why don't you take the car for a spin and then come on back when you're ready? And I know when I tell this story, a lot of people, including your superintendent, was like, oh my gosh, don't tell them the story. We don't want anyone to do that. But I think at the end of the day, what this lesson taught me is number one, the kindness of someone who really cares for you, who gives you what you need. And what I needed was just to take a breath and remove myself from the situation. The second thing that it taught me too is that sometimes we need to collect ourselves. We need to really get a sense of what it is that we need in that moment. And that's an exercise that I often take teachers through as well. And I remember upon graduation, I wrote some teachers letters just saying thank you so much. Obviously, Mr. Graham was at the top of my list. And I gave it to him. I graduated. We remained friends. We would go for coffee, all these things. And then several years later, he called me up and we were supposed to meet up. And he said, Morgane, I have some not so great news. And in that moment, he told me over the phone, I have terminal cancer. My entire world felt like it was slipping out from under me. It was a devastating moment. He had been an incredible mentor, adopted family member. He was a really big part of my life. So this was devastating. We continued as though we always had. We'd go for coffee, go for walks, all the things. And then again, he called me up and he said, we're supposed to meet today and I can't do it. Can you come to the house? And I said, of course. So I drove over to his house. His wife opened the door, gave me a big hug. I walked in. I knew that he was going to be in his room and I knew that time was limited. And I walked down that hallway and there, just before I walked in the door, hanging framed on his wall was that graduation letter that I had sent him. And oh my goodness, that moment. It still gives me chills. It really does. I felt so, I think, honored to have been a part of his life because of the way that he had impacted me. What I hadn't realized is that there was a reciprocal nature to that connection and that I, in fact, had been a connection point for him. And when I think about some of my students and the way, even in kindergarten, they have impacted my learning, my growth, the way that I am able to show up for them, it is that reciprocal nature. And I think sometimes much of the work that I do is based around that feeling of burnout when we lose that sense of what first got us in the profession in the first place, whether it's leadership or teaching. And that moment always reminds me that's why I got into it. And that's what gives me the energy every day with my Ks.
Tu parles français?
Oui, je parle français. Pas beaucoup, mais un petit peu. C'est la première fois que je parle sur un podcast. So that's the first time I've ever spoken French on a podcast.
Je parle français un petit peu. When I was in grade 1, I was expelled. I'll just maybe asked to just go somewhere else. I don't know if they called it expelled, but they just said, you should not stay. And I went to a French immersion school for grade 2. And I kind of, I resonated when you said you left France, you got plunked into Canada. That was kind of me.
Yeah.
I went no any French whatsoever. And that was a 1-year experience and I was back out of there. That was not for me. This is such a powerful story to me, Morgane, because your earth was Mr. Graham's earth. And the why behind it, that element is so rooted in just that personal connection. It is so rooted in collaboration, the togetherness of people. And we want to focus on building each other up. And your example, Mr. Graham's example, was failing graciously. And I call it failing forward. And so mistakes are the definition of how we learn, right? Learning is about going from incompetence to competence to incompetence, back to competence again. It's so powerful, and it's so clear how Mr. Graham's influenced you along the way. What's really cool to touch on with that is I just had a conversation with somebody else on the podcast. We talked about the generations that one teacher can touch. And Mr. Graham, I don't know before him who would have influenced him as an educator. Start at his root. He's pushed it to you, pushing that on to kids now. Mr. Graham's actually touched as well the kids that you've worked with.
Yeah,
because
that's
he influenced
true.
Because he's influenced who you are. We think about, I want to help the one kid. You're not just helping the kids you saw. You're going to help their kids. You're going to help their kids, because anybody that became a teacher because of the things that you did are a driving force of your message still.
Oh,
So
that is so good. I love that. You're so right. Can I add a piece to that?
They were so right. They were so right. I'm repeating what they said. But yeah, go for it.
You're tying the threads together, though. But I think that there's also this other piece, and perhaps maybe mostly in primary, but I would say in tight-knit schools too. We see this also rippling out to parents. And I've noticed my kids are 8 and 10 now, just about. And I think when you're seen as a parent and an educator, there is a special connection too, where parents come to you and they're looking for advice and they're trying to glean from you. Is this normal? Is my kid okay? And you're actually helping the parents. You're almost parenting the parents too, which is a beautiful, trusting relationship. This doesn't always happen. But I feel honored to also be able to start walking in that realm. And it's a beautiful thing to see parents take a deep breath and go, oh, I'm okay. Because I think on some level, we're all just scared that we're not going to make it, or that there's something inherently wrong with us. When I do my one-on-one coaching with these executive leaders who are wonderfully accomplished, their biggest insecurity is maybe someone's going to find me out. There's this massive imposter syndrome. And so it's really cool to see people take their guard down and go, I'm okay.
And it's because there's no crash course on that, right? So we even just talked parenting 101. Sure, okay, when I became a dad, yeah, I got the How to Be a Dad for Dummies book, and I gave that a read, and I said, there is not enough in this to prepare me for what I need to do. We took classes, we did all these things. Man, was I not ready, but boy, did I ever understand something that people said to me before I was a dad, and it was, you'll get it when you're a dad. You'll get it when you have kids. And I hated that because I taught kids before I was a dad. And whenever a kid did something wrong, made a mistake, needed to learn, needed extra support, a part of me didn't always have that connection until I experienced it too. And then I sit there, right? That's somebody's kid, right? All will always love that kid, no matter what's going on. And they're always going to go to bat for that kid because that's their kid.
Yeah.
So it's such a powerful message. But you're so right in the sense too, that it also reaffirmed to me that parents weren't taught how to be parents. They were taught by their parents how to be parents, right?
And
Who were taught by their
yeah.
parents and their parent, right? This is so same idea. Teachers were taught by teachers, and it's that generational impact that we get to have, being rooted in the why of that collaborations. We can sit here and already know, long after you're gone, we might not be in a history book about the best educator we were, but people will have a direct influence and perspective from what you've done, which is something that's so powerful because it's so heavily rooted in your earth of your core value of why is that best for kids. You mentioned it very briefly. Kindergarten is where we are now.
Yes, kindergarten and leadership, curriculum development, and professional development. And then I do some things on the side, like my books and coaching and courses. So I do that as well. But I've been very lucky to have a district that supports me in that and is very flexible. So that's been a really wonderful journey for me.
Very cool. And has it always been kindergarten?
It's been kindergarten was my actually 8th grade was my very first contract for it was like a stress leave from May and June, finishing off the year. And I think it confirmed for me how much I love the little ones.
8th grade stress leave turned into your stress leave.
It turned into my wow, that's a good reckoning. Yeah. I was like, okay, this isn't for me. But you know what? We finished it off pretty well, but it was a challenging bunch for sure. And then my very first contract was one of those half-day kindergartens, so a morning and an afternoon, and in French immersion. And then I came back to kindergarten recently. I was doing first grade and second grade for quite a while. And then I came back, and it's actually been a beautiful transition back. I've loved it. And it is incredible to see what those little 4 and 5-year-olds can do in reading, writing, the way that they develop. Like, they come to you, not all of them, but they come to you a bit feral in our district. Not all of them. I should be a little kinder. The ones that haven't gone to preschool and we don't have junior kindergartens. They're literally 4 years old, some of them. And they're coming in and they're biting and scratching, some of them, and they don't know how to share. They don't know how to talk to each other. And by the end, it's this whole other thing. They just totally transform. And so it's been just the best.
So that changes. I'm just confirming that my 2-year-old, every now and then we get the daycare report. So bit so today. Yeah. They bit a friend, and well, that doesn't sound like a friend to me. But
exactly.
It is what it is. So.
Yeah, no, it does. It irons itself out, I think, over time.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. That's good to hear. Something that's really powerful in your whole story, and we're going to jump around throughout this and unpack the elements and how they exist within this, is decisions you made and things that happen in your life. The elements influence them. Mm-hmm. Your why, you're driven to be there for people, to build that connection. That was reaffirmed for you at a very young age. And then through Mr. Graham's work with you and validated through what you're doing now. And it's so cool to see. Now, you did when you uprooted and then you were going through some tough times. That's the adversity. And that's very much like the wind, and how the wind hits us and sometimes it knocks us off our feet. It finds a way to get into every little nook and cranny. So what kind of struggles did we experience through that, and how did our value of connections and our why push us through?
Wow, big questions. So I've been really grappling with sharing my story at length, only because I think it's one of those things that it takes time to share that in a public way. However, I think when your primary relationships, meaning your family, your sort of nuclear family, has challenges that are deep, meaning they don't always show up in the way that they should be as parents, as support networks, it can be super challenging in terms of your self-concept, the way that you conceptualize the world, your frame of reference. So for me, I experienced that firsthand in many different ways. And I think in so many ways it has, initially, I think my response was to try and be better, better, better. And I think what I've realized in my adulthood is actually, no, you're a beautiful, functioning, lovely, lovable human being as you are. And to shine more brightly as that person that I am. And I think in doing so, I hope I'm able to connect with people on that authentic level where they're able to see the authentic, wholehearted, beautiful person that they are. And from that very secure place and understanding the embodiment actually of who they are. Because I think it's one thing to understand who you are intellectually, but to embody that and to accept that on a very deep spiritual, emotional level, and then send that out to others, that's a really great place to be. And when I think about the work that I do, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in leadership within my district, whether it's keynoting, writing, I think about it all as human development and my own, but also other people. And I think that allowing the space to let people tap into the authentic expression of who they are is my greatest joy. It truly is. It gives me goosebumps. It is what I love to do. It permeates every aspect of the work that I do. And so I suppose I'm a teacher that way in all the work that I do because I think I've lived it. And I'm always grappling with that. I think you don't ever really arrive, but you can feel it. Today we were coaching upper level track and field, and I had a girl who I taught back when she was in first grade. And she came to me and she was like, Mrs. Michael, I just feel so nervous about this race. And I know this is a struggle for her and a big stretch. This race is hard. And I said to her, I know. And what's the hardest part right now for you? She's just, I just don't know if I can do it. And I don't know how other people will feel about me. And I think just being able to just sit down with her and really coach her through that whole idea of who are you comparing yourself to right now? Because when you look down the line at other people, that's not going to help you. Did you do better than you did last week? She was like, I think so. Are you still here this week? Yeah. You should be so incredibly proud. I said, there are so many children in this school who decided this isn't for me, and they did one practice and they haven't come back. You've come back every time and you are hustling. I said, you got to be proud of that. And I think she had a different conceptualization of it. And we do this as adults all the time. We look to our next lane and to what other people are doing, whether it's in podcasting, whether it's in teaching, and we're looking at other people's bulletin boards or Pinterest boards to measure ourselves against that. And it's just not a helpful thing to do, right? So I think that's a piece of it too, is the more that you look inward and the more that you celebrate what you are doing well, the more you can shine out and grow. I think the opposite really does dampen any of that growth.
Hey everyone, it's Tyler, the Elemental Educator, here with some exciting news. We've just launched our brand new website with everything you need in one place. And I'm thrilled to introduce our new workshop on Earth, focusing on core values and the heart of decision making. This workshop will come with 10 downloadable PDF documents for you to interact with, follow along, engage in chats and discussions, be a part of making a better leadership world for everyone. Stay tuned because we also have fire, air, and water workshops coming soon.
Fire, earth, wind, and water. Not just parts of nature, but our elemental forces shaping the transformative power of education. Showing you the way on the Elemental Educator with your host, Tyler Comeau.
And while the people at the bottom are busy competing, the people at the top are too busy collaborating to worry about all the competition.
100%.
And what you're sharing, your story and the advice that you gave this girl, it's actually so related to the fluid dynamics in water and wind, because when you're talking about growth and you talk about individual growth, you're showing them that when a barrier is put in their way, like water, like wind, there's not a linear path through it. You can find many ways to get around this barrier that's been put in front of you. And it's going to look different for everyone. And it should look different for everyone. And we're not going to look at the lane to our right and to our left because they have different barriers that they need to go around.
Yeah.
So the strength in how you just embraced your wind and embraced your water and you pushed that out to other people, that is such a powerful message. And that girl is so lucky to hear that, because we preach, at least in Canada, we preach there's standards and you should be at this grade at this level, this grade this level, this grade this level, and this grade this level. But kids don't come at the level before always. And it's about meeting them where they're at. And when we say that, there's an expectation somewhere along the lines this happened where teachers went, okay, I'm going to meet them where they're at, but I have to get them to where they need to go. That's just unrealistic. That's not a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of input. Meeting people where they're at is recognizing where they are right now and their own path of growth and how much they can do in a year. The transformative principle actually put this very powerfully, because we talk about learning loss from the pandemic, and his very strong argument is there's no such thing. There was no such thing as learning loss. We just slowed our growth. And we didn't actually forget anything. We didn't actually have loss of learning. We simply just didn't grow at the rates that we used to expect to. And maybe we weren't supposed to be growing at the rate we were growing at anyway. Who knows?
Unsustainable, maybe, that kind of growth, and like that, just that feeling of faster, quicker, and just that whole hamster wheel of productivity, I think, can sometimes permeate the school culture too, right? And sometimes we need to let things percolate a little bit and allow for that growth. I have some really good friends, one of whom I'm thinking of specifically, and he has a wonderful career, and this is a really difficult career. He's in marine pilotage, and when he was a child in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, he didn't read, he didn't write, he barely spoke properly. People wrote him off like he was what they would have called back then like special needs. He would have been a priority student in the ILT programs, and they would have tried to integrate him, and it would have been hard, and he wouldn't have fit the mold, and they would have been like, what do we do with this kid? He is one of the most intelligent, like incredibly competent people, has such an immense capacity for empathy and just overall kindness. Like, he's just this wonderful person, and it took him a while to grow into himself. And I think sometimes we can get ourselves into trouble when we assess kids according to that age metric, because it doesn't really allow for some of those outliers to develop in a way that's authentic to their lifeline. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to speed up at the same speed. His brain was probably super developing in other areas, and then it came together in his 20s. But it took him longer. And I think if we measure children and we write them off at 5 years old, oh my goodness, we really sell ourselves short, because you're losing this incredible access to this wonderful little human if we just say, oh, you need to be reading a level whatever by 6 years old. There's more to people than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the big push is we need to change the way that we are assessing and the way that we're teaching, where we still teach the strand and we still teach the outcome, but the outcome itself is worded in such a open for interpretation, innovative, creative mindset outlook that you can differentiate a single strand for 20 different kids in a classroom.
Yes.
And that's what's really powerful. You set us up for a nice little transition here, because we talked about needing to let things percolate. And if we don't, we're going to end up at a place that you wrote about called Burnout.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping you can walk me down. First of all, this is a risk that you took when you did this. And this is playing with fire. And what's really cool is we'll unpack this here, but I want to hear how your earth and your value of the collaboration, the connection, helped you take that risk and play with fire from the external source to write and push out this book for people.
Okay, so risk is not something that I'd say was my number one value or emotional need. I think for me, certainty was a huge emotional need. I talk about emotional needs quite a bit with the folks that I work with. And certainty, a roadmap, knowing that I belonged, all of those things are thrown up in the air when you take any kind of risk. It can be scary because you have to reconfigure some of your social dynamics and some of your connections. You have no certainty when you're doing something risky because it might work or it might not. You don't necessarily know how it's going to resonate with people. And I think when it comes to like evolutionary psychology, whenever we're taking a risk, it's like we are setting ourselves apart from the group, which essentially is the same as death. So your subconscious mind is actively going to dissuade you from doing anything that remotely seems risky because it equals death in that old brain. So essentially I had back in 2017 I'm a big journaler. So I had journaled all of the things that I wanted to do. And I had a toddler and I had a newborn. And probably this was a little bit of impetus. I love being active, busy. I like having a project. I have a busy brain and I need to feed it with jobs. And so I think the being at home with a toddler and a newborn was a different kind of challenge for me, because a busy classroom, yes, you deal with kids and you're with them all the time and they need you, but it's different than those quiet lulls where you're just being. And so I remember writing my goals down and feeling like I just wanted to use that brain. I wanted to write. I wanted to do some things. So I wrote down some goals and I said, and I had no business doing this because at this point I didn't have a podcast. I didn't have a blog. I didn't have any online presence. It was just me, myself, and I, and my career that was currently on hold because I was at home with the kids. And I wrote down, I'm going to write a book. And I did a couple of other things. And then I went back to that goal and I was like, oh, that's weird. And something about that kind of niggled at me, and I started writing a blog. And I just wrote a little bit about some of my experiences with the kids around kindness, whatever it was. And it took off a little bit. And then I ended up reaching out to a local publisher and said, I really want to talk about kindness and I want to talk about within the context of the community. And so they're like, great, come on in. We'll talk about a book deal. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is happening. And so I go in, as it's about 2018 now, and signed a contract. And I was going to write a kid's book all about kindness and the community and how we help those who are less fortunate. I wrote 80,000 words. And it was a messy editing process. Now that I've been through it a couple of times, I'm like, I don't know that they really held my hand through it, so that I don't think that I was clear on what was expected, and I don't think they knew where I was at. And so just, I think, a communication thing. Anyway, so I remember meeting up with the editor and showing her the things, going, I don't think this is it. And she looks at it, she's, I don't think this is it. And I just remember being like, I know. And it was funny now, looking back on it. Oh my gosh, Tyler, at the time I had to I said goodbye. I was gracious, whatever. I step into my car. I called my husband at the time and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just need a bit of time to process this. It didn't work out. Failing gloriously, right? So I drove around just collecting myself for about an hour and a half, just crying and thinking, and it just felt like a failure, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I tried it. This thing didn't work. Fast forward to just before the pandemic, and I had been blogging and I had been speaking a little bit just locally about not exactly burnout yet, but some of those practices that we need to do for self-care. And I had Solution Tree publishers reach out and they said, Morgane, do you have a book in you? We love your blog. We love your podcast. I'd started a podcast at this point. And I said, sure, I do. Actually, I've been working on one, and I had been a different one. And so we worked together, and I actually signed that contract for this book on March 2020. I think it was the 13th or something. That was like the day before the world shut down. So it was pretty crazy how that kind of came together, and then worked on the book. So yeah, I would say that was a risk that I took. It worked out well, and it was a bit scary. I think I was worried about how it would translate within my work, but I think it's worked out okay. Yeah.
What's so cool about what you just shared is it's actually a massive risk what you did, but because it was so rooted in your values and you had your connection and you knew why you were doing it, it felt like nothing. You were just like, oh, hey, I'm going to go check this out. Oh, hey, I'm going to go check this out.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, yeah, I wrote these words. You were so rooted in why you were doing it that it felt easy to take the risk. That's the message that's so important for anybody listening right now, is when you know your why and your risk you're taking is rooted to that why, it doesn't feel like a risk.
That is so true. And I think that's where you can be involved in different projects when you're clear. And I love that you're touching on values, because I've done a lot of work on my personal values and love to work on values with people. But that value of growth and connection are my two top values. So everything comes back to that.
And there we go. How many words did the book end up being?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question. I want to say it was like 35,000 words or something. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, 80,000. That's your master's. There you go.
Yeah.
Or your dissertation.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
ready. You got it. You got it figured out. You're good to go. So it's so cool to hear your story and to unpack how your values shaped how you're faced with adversity and you're using them to take your risks. You shared one story about this track and field experience, and I know you're working with a bunch of kinders. And what's so special about kinders is their brains are so plastic still and can be morphed and shaped into whatever we want it to be. They're open to all these ideas. Are you intentionally taking these values and bringing them into your class, and what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, sometimes my language obviously would be different. But yeah, we talk a lot about our class being a family. Whenever we have a newcomer, it's basically, instead of being like, oh, I have a new student, it's no, what a wonderful opportunity to, number one, secure and redefine who we are as a unit, as a family. Because then when we're really clear on who we are, we can communicate that to our new student. But the secret underlying lesson in that is we get to get clear on who we are and how we welcome people. We talk about the way that we greet people. We might take the opportunity with those new students. Like, for example, I had a new one who came from Turkey, speaks Russian, not a word of English. So I'm like, I got you. I know that feeling. And so a little bit of Google Translate, but mostly we're doing charades a lot. And the reason I'm doing that is because that's best practice immersion. It's not about translating. The second thing is we have another student who came in who just came from a nearby district. And you can model again what the expectations are. And those expectations aren't just for classroom management. It's for what are our social norms? Are you using your observational skills to take the temperature of the room? We literally have a little stop sign at the door that's like, when you're re-entering the room, whether it's like you've been to the bathroom or you've been with an ILT teacher or something, you stop at the door, you scan, what are your friends doing? All the things that adults do anyway, most of us unconsciously, but it gives them that hidden curriculum cue that can help them to integrate. So I think that it helps us solidify our identity as a group, and then it also reestablishes those norms so that we are all on the same page. And I think adults could stand to do this more often too. This is what we do at a staff meeting. This is how we address each other. This is how we do parent-teacher interviews, because it helps our parents to feel like we know their child and we see their child and we love their child. And here's something tangible to do. Like all of these things, if we look at it through that lens, it can be tremendously helpful. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely, it does. One thing you said was people understand how we do the interviews. I would say they need to know the why they do. Simon Sinek fan.
Yeah,
And
me too.
One of my favorite quotes from him is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yes.
And what you're doing in your classroom, sure, you're using your charades to show people how they do everything. What you're actually showing them is the why that we do it. It's May 2nd. I just made a post today. There's an episode coming out tomorrow with Jenna, and she says the little teaser ad that we put out today is I call my class my family.
Nice.
And I don't view myself as their mother. I view them as their guide, though.
Yes.
And the parents get it when I refer to them as my kids and I talk about them as my kids' family. This is just, it's so good to see how
it translates everywhere.
It translates everywhere. You found my words for me. It translates everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's all around that. This is what works for kids. We're not going to compete.
Yeah.
Because competing gets people nowhere. I struggle with some of the things that people ask because they're competition based. Right. I struggle with awards in elementary. I struggle with that get given out. I struggle with acceptance rates for places, anything that's competition based.
Yeah.
Because you're not really getting the best out of people, and you're not always guaranteeing you're getting the best people that know how to meet your standard that you wanted to get them in.
Totally. Compliance. Yeah.
You're
compliance.
You absolutely, you're getting from them. Now, we did talk about your book a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping this can be an opportunity for you to share beyond your classroom. What's this platform you're running?
Yeah. So I've written, basically my first book was called From Burnt Out to Fired Up. And it's essentially, it's the
Amazing.
book. Thank
It's
you.
essentially amazing.
Thank you. It's the book version of the keynote and workshops that I do. It's just more of a deep dive. So what I really heard from people as I was doing workshops and working on some of this, it's not just self-care, it's self-development. There's a lot around goal setting and looking forward to a compelling future, and that is really exciting to me. And a lot of room for play and creativity. So essentially it's based on 5 pillars. So the first is about reflecting on who you are and where you're at, and a lot of mindfulness strategies. So simple things like honestly just taking a moment, breathing, asking yourself these questions. How am I feeling right now? Where do I feel it in my body? And what do I need right now? And the more that you practice that 2 or 3 minute mindfulness moment, the more likely you are to tune into actually what it is that you need. The second pillar is based on reframing. So this is more your resiliency toolbox. And resiliency is tricky, but it's not impossible. And it's really just looking at, okay, here's my circumstance. I've already taken my temperature. I've already reflected on where I'm at. Now I'm going to choose. How do I want to tell a story about myself? And when we get back to that thing about why, do you want to look back on your life and look at all your challenges and blame everything on everyone else and feel like life was out of your hands? Or do you want to take the wheel, be the freaking driver in your life, and decide how you want to tell the story about what's happening to you? Because I really do believe that life happens for you, not to you. And you get to decide. I've been through the ringer in my early days and even in my subsequent adult life. There have been some really hard moments. And I don't share a lot of those things with a lot of people because I don't really need to do that. I don't need to blame anybody for anything. But what I do know is the only thing that gives me this optimistic outlook is the fact that I get to control the story. I get to decide my future is going to look like this, and the way that I'm going to parent my children is going to be like this, and I get to decide that. And that's really an empowering place to come from. So there's a lot of work on resiliency. The next one is about focusing forward. So refocus is really about, okay, I know where I've come from. I know the maladaptive stories that aren't helping me, so I'm going to cast those to the side and I'm going to look forward at a more compelling future. And the future is really about, what are my values? What do I believe? And where do I want to go? And then you can get tactical. But most of the time, you don't even really need tactics. You don't need the how. Because like you say, the why is really important. Until you know the what and the why, like, where am I going? Until you can answer that question, what do you want? You have a really hard time getting there if you don't know where you're going, right? If you put that into the Google, the car thing, my goodness. Thank you.
Google Maps.
Google Maps. You're really not going to get anywhere. So you have to be clear on where you want to go. And then the tactical piece is fairly easy. It doesn't really matter. You can go lots of different ways, lots of different routes to get to where you want to go. And then reconnect is about the social connection. And the number one determinant of our success as human beings and longevity and our overall health comes down to our social connections. So why not actively bolster those, right? Many different ways of doing that. And then finally, the recreate or the reveal piece is about just coming back to ourselves and really connecting with that playful element of ourselves, which a lot of us, I think, forget. We are all creative beings, and that is where our truest expression comes from, whether it's how we greet our students at the door, the way that we approach a new recipe, whatever it is.
And what I love so much about your book, there's really two key pieces that I really appreciate, or at least that I've pulled from it. Your book really resonates with wind and water, and it's essentially a how-to look at an obstacle and embrace going around it. Mm-hmm. And it's so reflected in the way that you talk. You just mentioned there's difficult times that come your way. Mm-hmm. They're not worth your time. They're not aligned to your why. You're going to find a way around it. You're going to find a way around it. So you're not going to spend time on it.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're preaching. The other thing that I actually really love about your book is at the end of every chapter, you have a here's the research that supports what I'm saying. And there is so much power in that. And that's really what this whole podcast for me is, because I'm doing the doctorate. I have the theory. I'm working on the application for it. We're taking that bridge of theory and academic, and we're taking the practical application and we're merging the two together and saying this is reality and this is the practical applied practices of this. To hear these lived experiences, it's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing about your book. If anybody listening wants to purchase this book, it comes highly recommended, and we'll talk about how to go about getting that directly from you potentially a little bit later here. We are getting close to the end. I can't believe 50 minutes has already come up really quick on us.
Crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, holy cow. I want to know what's next for you.
Yeah. I have the second book, A Blueprint for Belonging, is coming out, and it's a response to educators and leaders, because often I have leaders who want to book me, and maybe they don't always resonate with the concept of burnout, but I think the concept of belonging and community certainly resonates for everyone. Whether you are a principal, vice principal, superintendent, trying to create that culture of belonging, that climate that's really welcoming, or you are an educator or a paraprofessional EA who is wanting to create that family environment in your classroom. So again, very tactical approach. We literally have toolboxes at the end of every chapter, which relate specifically to research-based approaches to explaining kindness strategies and how that specifically bolsters our feeling of community in a school, tips for how to do that. There are research points on incivility and how that actually costs districts money. So if you have toxic workplaces, that can actually impede your overall productivity, the feeling in a room, and even down to how a student performs on tests. So this is important stuff. And then we also talk about restorative practices. We talk about bias, implicit bias, and sometimes that's a really scary topic for people, but I try to unpack it in a really accessible way. And so I have things that are like questions you should be asking when you bring a resource into your classroom that might make it more accessible to everyone. So just targeting things like overcoming our biases instead of feeling simply guilty about them. Okay, so we have biases. Yes, we all do. Everyone does. So what do we do about it? And so I have some really specific strategies that you can do that, unpack, and really dig into that without feeling like you're somehow a participant or you're not able to help things along, if that makes sense. So I love this book because it's very tactical, strategy-based, and it's for educators and leaders.
And just in you explaining the book, the why is apparent. It's to help whoever's out there who needs to hear it, who needs to connect as well. You touched on this a little bit. I'm curious, beyond Mr. Graham, who or where or what did you turn to for inspiration for what you're doing?
Oh my goodness. I will say my number one mentor right now is Seth Godin, and he's a marketing best-selling author in New York City, and I have had him on my podcast 3 times now. He's the most generous human being, and he's just so, I don't even know how to describe him. He's so wise, and he's so clear about when you are doing something for an audience, really think about it generously. Offer this service, offer your knowledge, and give it to them with the genuine intent that it is for their well-being. And I think that whenever you're teaching, whether you're running a podcast, whatever it is, it's because you care so deeply about it and you want to share this with the world, not because you're going to profit from it, but because it's going to make people better. And he is so good at clarifying that. And he was very generous. He's someone who helped me with my podcast. He invited me back to be a coach. And so I really loved the power of coaching with adults, because adults are different from children, same but different. And so that was very rewarding. His work is absolutely top for me.
And I'm not surprised that's who you said, because your why and his why are so the same, and there's the alignment sense that there's the connection. Mm-hmm. If people want to get in touch with you, they want to learn about your story, what's the best way for them to find you?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So morgane.com is my website. And then I'm on social media, Facebook, everything. If you search Morgane Michael, you'll find me. YouTube, Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram. That's probably my best way, at Small Act Big Impact. But just search my name and I'll come up. And then you can get my book through me. If you want to contact me directly, you can find my email on my website, and also through Solution Tree or Amazon. So you can order bulk if you want.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
This is my favorite thing that I get to do when I end a podcast with people. I get to put them on the spot, which I have this whole time anyway. Let's be honest. I put you on the spot this whole time and it's been incredible. But I get to sit here and say, you get the stage for 30 seconds to a minute, and you're just asked one question. For anybody listening, what advice are you giving them?
My goodness. I would say trust the voice inside that says, this is not the job for me. this is not the partner for me, this is not the path for me, this is not the direction for me, or this is where I want to be going. But trust that voice. There is some infinite wisdom inside that mindset of yours that must be listened to, because it will come out in funny little ways. And I think that this is probably the most important advice, because you always know the right step. Sometimes your conscious brain will get in there and negotiate yourself out of it because it's not convenient, or it's scary, or it's challenging, or it's risky. But I would say 100% of the time, that little voice is bang on. And the quicker you follow it, the quicker you will get to where you're supposed to be.
I love that advice. That's amazing. Trust yourself. And the process. Morgane, it's been my absolute pleasure to have you on my show, and maybe you become the Seth Godin here, and we have you for another 2 episodes coming up, and we talk about your next book release the next time you talk at my division again. Thank you so much for giving me the time and letting everybody listening hear your story.
Oh, Tyler, this has been such a pleasure, and I am so incredibly, and I say this coming alongside you as a colleague, I'm so proud of the work that you're doing. I think that you're doing good work, and it's important, and don't stop. Just keep doing it.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to The Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on The Elemental Educator.